Josiah was a young king, only 8 years old when he took the throne. Despite his tender age, he carried the weight of a nation on his small shoulders. The kingdom of Judah was in turmoil, and the people had strayed far from their faith. But Josiah was not an ordinary child. He was destined for greatness. But Josiah had a heart for God. From a young age, he sought the Lord with all his heart. He spent hours in prayer and meditation, seeking wisdom and guidance. He read the ancient scriptures, absorbing their teachings and letting them shape his character. He wanted to do what was right. Josiah was determined to lead his people back to righteousness. He consulted with his advisors, making decisions that would steer the nation back to its spiritual roots. His resolve was unwavering, and his vision was clear. He wanted to lead his people back to God. Josiah knew that true leadership meant guiding his people towards a higher purpose. He addressed the nation, speaking with a conviction that belied his years. His words inspired hope and a longing for renewal. One day, Josiah called all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem together. He knew that to bring about true change, he needed the support of the nation's leaders. The elders, wise and experienced, gathered at his summons, curious about what the young king had to say. He summoned the priests, the prophets, and all the people. Josiah understood that spiritual renewal required the involvement of all segments of society. The priests and prophets, the spiritual guides of the nation, stood ready to hear his call. They gathered in the temple courtyard, a sea of faces looking up at their young king. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Men, women, and children, all eager to hear the words of their leader, filled the courtyard to its brim. Josiah stood before them, his young voice echoing through the courtyard. Despite his youth, his presence commanded respect. He spoke with a passion that resonated with everyone present, his words carrying the weight of his convictions. He called for a return to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Josiah reminded them of their rich heritage, of the promises made to their forefathers. He urged them to turn away from their sins and return to the path of righteousness. He reminded them of the covenant, the sacred promise between God and his people. Josiah held up the ancient scrolls, the words of the covenant inscribed upon them. He spoke of the blessings that would come from obedience and the consequences of straying from God's path. Josiah yearned to see that covenant renewed, to see his people walking in obedience and love. His heart ached for a revival, for a nation that honored God in all its ways. He called upon his people to join him in this sacred mission to restore their relationship with the Almighty. During the temple restoration, a momentous discovery was made. Hilkiah, the high priest, discovered something extraordinary amidst the rubble and dust. It was the Book of the Law, a sacred text long lost and forgotten amidst years of neglect and abandonment. This wasn't just any book, it contained the very words of God, the divine instructions meant for his people, guiding them in their faith and daily lives. Hilkiah, understanding the gravity of his find, brought the book to Shaphan, the scribe. Shaphan, in turn, presented it to King Josiah, knowing its importance. As Shaphan read the words aloud, Josiah listened intently, his heart and mind absorbing every word. The words resonated deep within his soul, igniting a fire within him, a fervent desire to return to the ways of righteousness. The Book of the Law laid bare the sins of the people, their idolatry, and their blatant disregard for God's commands. Josiah was devastated by the revelations. Overcome with grief and despair, he tore his robes, a traditional sign of mourning and repentance. In that moment, Josiah realized how far his people had strayed from the path of righteousness, and he knew that drastic measures were needed to bring them back to God's ways. Josiah's heart broke as he listened to the words of the law. He realized how far his people had strayed from God. They had forgotten his commands and turned to idols. He saw the pain and suffering their sin had caused. He saw the brokenness and the distance between them and God. Josiah knew he had to act. He couldn't stand idly by while his people continued down this destructive path. Josiah tore his clothes in grief and repentance. He humbled himself before God, seeking forgiveness for himself and his people. His heart ached for their restoration, for their return to God's loving embrace. King Josiah, deeply moved and determined to make things right, gathered his people once more. He stood before them, the book of the law held high, and read God's words aloud. The people listened, their hearts stirred by the power of God's truth. They wept as they heard of their transgressions, realizing their need for repentance and renewal. With tears in his eyes, Josiah made a solemn vow. He promised to lead the people back to God, to uphold the covenant, and to walk in obedience to God's commands. And so in that sacred assembly, king and people together renewed their covenant with God. It was a moment of profound significance, a turning point in the history of Judah. Section 5. Idols fall, true worship rises. Josiah, fueled by a righteous zeal, launched into action. He commanded the removal of all idols from the land. Statues of Baal, Asherah poles, and images of foreign gods were torn down, smashed and burned. The high places, those forbidden altars of pagan worship scattered throughout the land, were destroyed. Josiah defiled them, making them unfit for any religious practice, ensuring they would no longer tempt his people. He purged the land of pagan priests and those who practiced divination and sorcery. Josiah restored the rightful place of Yahweh, the one true God, as the sole object of worship in Judah. Section 6. A Passover to remember. Among Josiah's reforms, the reinstatement of the Passover stands out. This sacred festival, commemorating the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt, had been neglected for generations. Josiah saw the Passover as a powerful symbol of God's faithfulness and love. He meticulously followed the instructions laid out in the book of the law, ensuring every detail was observed with precision. The people gathered from all corners of the land, their hearts filled with gratitude and awe. They celebrated the Passover with unprecedented joy and devotion, their spirits reignited by this act of obedience and remembrance. Section 7. The Legacy of a Righteous King. Josiah's reign marked a period of spiritual revival in Judah. He stands as a testament to the power of one person's unwavering faith and courage to make a difference. His dedication to God, his humility and repentance, and his resolute action against idolatry left an indelible mark on his people. He showed them the importance of seeking God's heart, of turning away from evil, and of embracing a life of obedience. Though his reign was cut tragically short, Josiah's legacy continued to inspire generations to come. He demonstrated the transformative power of a life surrendered to God, a life that dared to stand against the tide of wickedness and lead others towards righteousness. Section 8. Darkness descends, Josiah's final battle. Despite Josiah's efforts, the surrounding nations remained steeped in idolatry and conflict. Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, on his way to confront the Babylonians, decided to pass through Judah. Josiah, perhaps feeling a sense of duty to protect his land or perhaps misjudging the situation, chose to confront Pharaoh Necho at Megiddo. This decision proved fatal. During the battle, Egyptian archers mortally wounded Josiah. He died on the battlefield, his reign of reform and spiritual revival brought to an abrupt and tragic end. Section 9. Hope endures, the impact of a faithful life. In this chapter, we delve into the profound influence of a life lived with unwavering faith and dedication. Josiah's death plunged Judah into mourning. The entire nation felt the weight of his loss, as if a guiding light had been extinguished. The people wept for their beloved king, the one who had led them back to God. His leadership had been a beacon of hope, steering them through turbulent times. His death served as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of life and the ever-present reality of evil in the world. The storm clouds that gathered over the city mirrored the sorrow in the hearts of the people. Despite the grief and the looming threat of foreign powers, Josiah's legacy endured. His influence was like the first light of dawn, breaking through the darkness and offering a glimmer of hope. He had planted seeds of faith and righteousness that would continue to grow in the hearts of his people. These seeds, nurtured by his example, promised a future where his values would flourish. Though darkness seemed to prevail, Josiah's life served as a beacon of hope. His unwavering faith was like a lighthouse guiding ships through a storm, a single candle illuminating the darkest night. His story reminds us that even in a world filled with challenges, one person's unwavering faith and courageous actions can make a profound and lasting impact. Josiah's life is a testament to the enduring power of faith, showing us that even in the face of adversity, hope can endure and inspire future generations.